Over the last few months, I've traveled across the Americas, visiting ancient sites that keep raising the same question. Does our history go deeper than we thought? But before we compare Mexico, Guatemala, and everything else, this journey has to start here, in Peru. Because after seeing these megaliths with my own eyes, I started wondering if the real mystery isn't just who built them, but whether these stones preserve something older, a technique, a memory, or a legacy inherited from the distant past. Almost exactly 3 months ago, I set out on a journey to search for answers to some of the most puzzling ancient mysteries in the Americas. But after everything I've seen, there's something I just haven't been able to shake. And honestly, something that has made me question almost everything. So let me just be honest. About a year before I ever set out on this journey, I was a college student with pretty much no direction. I didn't know what I was doing with my life. I was lost, searching for answers and searching for purpose. And somewhere in that season of life, I was sitting around one night watching TV when my mom called me. And she said, "Hey, you should watch that new series on Netflix, Ancient Apocalypse." Now, mind you, at the time, I had no idea who Graham Hancock was or anything of that nature. And I didn't really know much about ancient history either. But long story short, I ended up binge watching both seasons in one night. And whether you love Graham Hancock or hate him, for whatever reason, that series lit a fire in me. For most of 2025, I became obsessed. I spent my time researching, watching videos, diving into everything from Atlantis to ancient cataclysms. So by the time I went on my first trip to Peru, I was absolutely convinced I was going to find clear evidence for a lost civilization of the Ice Age or something. A civilization that would have existed thousands of years prior to anything that we thought we knew. But the truth is, what I found was far more complicated than that. And after everything I've seen, I just can't ignore it anymore. So in the first part in this series, I want to break down 3 new perspectives that completely change the way I look at these ancient sites, both in the Americas and all over the world, frankly. For a while now, I've been conflicted in my beliefs on whether the Inca did or did not build everything we see in Peru. From the megalithic walls in Cusco to places like Sacsayhuaman or Ollantaytambo, there are still questions that remain. Questions about how these sites were built, when they were built, and why they were built the way they were. But if you'd like to see more in-depth videos on those places I just mentioned, I will link those in the description. The point here is that from my perspective, there seems to be a clear divide between mainstream archaeological understanding and what some would call the alternative view of history. On one side, you seem to have people that are very firm in the idea that there is not more to the story. And one of my favorite lines is always, "There's no mystery here." But on the flip side, I have noticed a similar kind of certainty, only in the opposite direction. The alternative side says yes, there is more to the story, and many of them seem just as convinced. I've mentioned before that I deeply admire people like Graham Hancock or Randall Carlson because they reopened the discussion around these ancient sites and brought new possibilities back to the table. But the truth is, I can't help but wonder if neither side is asking the right question. Maybe there's a missing link that both sides are missing here. And that is why I think it's important to start with something that we know both mainstream and alternative people can agree on. And that is that the story of precision construction did not begin in Cusco. Instead, we have to look farther back, to the archaeological sites of Tiwanaku and Pumapunku. Both of these sites contain sections of precision stonework that rival anything we see in Peru, but not necessarily in the way you might expect, because while Sacsayhuaman in Peru has massive polygonal masonry with near invisible joints, Tiwanaku and Pumapunku have something arguably more interesting. Sure, many of the stones found at these sites are quite large, and they are impressively carved, with some single-piece stones weighing up to 100 tons. But it's only when you look at the specific measurements of some of these stones that you really get to understand just how precise they are. Some of those massive stones we just mentioned are said to be within 1 degree of being perfectly level, which has led some researchers to suggest that they may have survived this entire time without moving really at all. In other words, they remained in their original position. And some researchers and engineers have claimed that Pumapunku specifically has stones that are not just accurate to the millimeter, but to thousands, even tens of thousands of an inch. Probably the most interesting claims that I've found are attributed to a man named Chris Dunn. A lot of you guys probably know who that is. Well, he's claimed that some of the stone surfaces at Pumapunku are within 2/10,000ths of an inch of being perfectly laser flat. Another more out there claim is that some of the famous H blocks are exactly 1 meter high, with repeating measurements like 22 and 30 centimeters. Whether every one of these numbers holds up or not is irrelevant. The question is obvious. How are they able to achieve the kind of precision we see here? And why would we see dimensions that appear to line up exactly with our modern measurement system? Like, surely they didn't know what a meter was. Now, before we move on, I do want to say that these claims are by no means widely accepted. And to many people, they are considered fringe or controversial. But I wanted to mention them because I think it's important to give people a fair assessment. The point is that precision stone construction was far from original by the time the Inca Empire came around. And I think at this point, it's probably fitting to quote the Spanish chronicler, Pedro Cieza de León, in his book, The Chronicles of Peru. All right, here we go. There are other things to tell of Tiwanaku, which I omit to save time. I wonder what that could mean. In conclusion, I would say that I consider this the oldest antiquity in all Peru. It is believed that before the Incas reigned, long before, certain of these buildings existed, and I have heard Indians say that the Incas built their great edifices of Cusco in the form that they saw of the wall of this town. I asked the natives if these buildings had been built in the time of the Inca, and they laughed at the question, repeating what I have said, that they were built before they reigned, but that they could not state or affirm who built them. However, they have heard from their forefathers that all that are there appeared overnight. Because of this, and because they also say that bearded men were seen on the island of Titicaca, and that these people constructed the building of Vinaque, I say that it might have been that before the Incas ruled, there were people of parts in these kingdoms, come from no one knows where, who did these things, and who, being few and the natives many, perished in the wars. So when the Inca told Cieza de León that all of this stuff appeared overnight, did they really believe that? If they did, it's incredible, because if you look at what the Inca did in Peru with all of these megalithic construction sites, no doubt would have taken them decades, then how much must they have respected the people that built whatever's there at Tiwanaku? I mean, they must have really revered these people, whoever they were, if they're trying to claim that they built it overnight. So the idea here is that what we could be seeing between Cusco, Tiwanaku, or other places is the idea of inheritance. Whether that inheritance comes from some lost ancient Ice Age civilization or not, it doesn't really matter because the inheritance itself seems real. But if the Inca were carrying on an older stone building legacy, whether from Tiwanaku or somewhere else, it still doesn't explain this. Because if you didn't know, the Inca didn't just think of stone as some form of construction. They were religious about it. The Inca didn't just think of stone as something to build with. They seem to have seen the stone as something sacred. The Inca believed rocks were living beings, especially the mountains, which were worshipped. Working with stone was not just construction. It was almost like a respectful dialogue between these beings. They believed stone was a way to connect with their ancestors, a way to connect with the divine. But maybe stone meant something else too, because there is a strange story from the Inca world that is honestly pretty shocking. In southern Ecuador, near Saraguru, researchers identified nearly 450 finely carved Inca andesite blocks. Some of those stones weighed quite a bit, with some estimates ranging all the way above 700 kilograms. At first, you might assume these were quarried nearby and used to build some structure by people that were local to the area. That would be the practical explanation. But geochemical testing showed something wild. The stones that were tested matched Rumicolca, the famous stone quarry near Cusco, more than 1,600 kilometers away. That means that the Inca appear to have moved hundreds of finely cut stone blocks from their homeland all the way to Ecuador. It is considered the longest known distance for the transport of large objects in the pre-Columbian New World. For what purpose? It makes no practical sense, unless the stones mattered so much to them that they didn't see them as ordinary building materials, but as something more. The likely destination for these stones was probably a place called Tomebamba, near modern Cuenca, This was a northern city deeply tied to Huayna Capac, the former Inca ruler. According to archaeologist Dennis Ogburn, who conducted the study, these stones may have embodied the transfer of sacredness and power from Cusco to Tomebamba. In other words, the Inca were not just transporting stone to build things. They were physically transporting the authority of Cusco into the north. That is a completely different way to think about construction. And according to the chronicler Martin de Murua, when the stones reached the Saguru region, lightning struck and split an important doorway stone. Huayna Capac took this as a bad omen and ordered the blocks to be left on the side of the royal road. This is the part that changes everything, because if the stones were simply construction material, abandoning them after that much effort wouldn't make any sense. But if they were sacred objects, if they were carrying the power of Cusco itself, then the lightning strike wasn't just bad weather, it was a message. But the abandoned stones also paint a broader picture. It's clear that they must have had pretty strong convictions if they were carrying 600 kg stones across 1,600 kilometers without the wheel or draft animals. But the question is why? Why were their convictions so strong that they were willing to do this? And is there something more that we are missing? In other words, why did the Inca believe stone could hold authority? Where exactly did that belief come from? And could the Incas' beliefs have been influenced by more than just the gods? According to legend, the Inca creator god Viracocha created the world's first humans from stone. The myth established stone as a living substance, a sacred vessel for their ancestors, and the foundation for their architectural and spiritual life. We've already mentioned that, but there's more to the story. In early Tiwanaku myths, Viracocha created the first generation of humans from stone, but later he destroyed them for disobedience. And this helped create a foundational belief that stone was a primordial material, a material inhabited by life and power. There's a lot more about Viracocha that gets really interesting and frankly quite bizarre, but I think I'm going to save that for another video. This brings me to my third perspective, which I think gets fairly overlooked in the heated debate between mainstream and alternative history. If we're going to talk about whether there's a missing link in our history, we have to look at what the people living there actually said about it. Because here's the thing, native memory may already point to a deeper past than we give it credit for. When I was researching the Inca oral traditions, I realized that they were never claiming to have invented everything from scratch. In fact, their own myths suggest that they were living among the remnants of a much, much older world. Take their creator god, Viracocha. The legend says he didn't just build the first humans, he carved them out of stone. This goes back to the Incas' foundational belief that stone is a primordial living substance. But it gets even more specific when you look at Tiwanaku. The Inca didn't look at Tiwanaku and say, yeah, our great-grandfathers built that. They looked at those ruins with a kind of religious awe. To them, Tiwanaku was the site of creation itself, a place built by the gods or by giants from a previous age, a previous sun that existed long before the Inca Empire ever took its first breath. So when we see the Inca hauling sacred stones over 1,600 kilometers into Ecuador, or building their most sacred temples atop massive megalithic foundations, maybe they weren't just being efficient. Maybe they were participating in a legacy. And it makes me wonder, what if the mystery isn't just about lost technology? What if it's really about lost continuity? If the Inca were looking backwards to an older, anomalous world to explain their own origins, why are we so hesitant to do the same? It feels like we've spent so much time arguing over how these stones were cut, and we've ignored the fact that people who lived there were telling us all along. The story didn't start with us. You know, I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out the answers to everything regarding the human timeline, but at some point I realized that finding the answers is not the point. It's mostly about the journey. The more I learn, the more my opinions are going to change. And that's okay. The point is growth. Who built the megaliths in Peru, Bolivia, Mexico, Egypt? Heck, I don't know. Nobody knows. Not for sure. We don't have time machines last time I checked. Or maybe we do. I digress. I suppose if there's anything you can take from this video, it's this. Maybe the mainstream side is wrong about some things. but maybe the alternative side is wrong about some things too. There is still mystery surrounding our ancient past. A lot more mystery than some people would like to admit. But at the same time, not everyone with a mainstream view is closed off to new ideas or new possibilities. And modern archaeology has done a lot for the world. In this video, I've discussed things that I think are worth noting, things I believe are important and that may help us better understand our past. But at the end of the day, it's just part of the discussion. It's not my way or the highway mentality. At the very least, I hope you've enjoyed exploring some of these mysteries with me, and hopefully it gave you something to think about. As you all know, this channel is not possible without the support from you guys. So if you would like to contribute, there are a few ways that you can do that. The first, obviously, is subscribing if you haven't already, and make sure to like the video and comment your thoughts down below. Comments really do help this video get out there. And lastly, I have set up a PayPal donations link if you are able to help in that area. It will be in both the description and in a pinned comment. Traveling to these sites is expensive, and making these videos does take a lot of time, and it will contribute directly to the future production of these videos. And also, just to mention, I am going to be making a change going forward. I want to include some more studio format videos like this one. I'll still continue with the on-site footage, believe me, but while I'm not on site, we'll have the opportunity to sit down here and explore other mysteries that maybe you just can't visit. But anyways, guys, I am going to wrap up this video. I really do appreciate everyone for all of the support. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.